in front of us for advanced logic requirements driving, the industry and many of these factories that we're building right now.
You mentioned cutting-edge chips, and may I ask you, I come back to this 80-20, 50-50. How does it apply to those cutting-edge chips?
Yeah.
And but maybe first I want to ask you, why did the West or the US particularly and Europe lose out?
Yeah.
And all those cutting-edge chip factories, I think 95% are now located in Taiwan, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Taiwan in particular, a couple of other, Korea as well.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, as I like to describe it, never was a vote taken in Brussels or DC to get rid of this industry. But there were votes taken in the Asians, countries, Korea, Taiwan, China, to get this industry. They put in place long-term industrial policy, tax, investment, et cetera, to attract this industry. And 30 years later, they attracted the industry, right? And all of a sudden, in COVID, we all woke up and we realized, oh my gosh, what happened? 30 years of industrial policy, and we lost something so critical to our future. The world needs balanced, resilient supply chains, and that's what created the environment for the US and the EU CHIPS Act.
Now, when you look at, already 2016, if I'm not mistaken, China put out several development plans. But some people, even today, China has not yet come up to the level of Taiwan. Why is it so difficult, could you tell us, to produce those cutting edge?
Yeah, as I like to say, if you want to be a cutting edge semiconductor supplier, you just need to invest 20, 30 billion of capital per year. You need to invest, 8 to 10 billion of R&D per year, and you need to do that for 30 years.
And how much do you invest?
In technology, we do 18 billion of R&D per year as a company. Per year. We'll do over 25 billion of capital last year. That's going up next year. It will go up the year after that. This is extraordinarily long-term R&D and capital intensive. It's a consolidating industry. There's only 3 companies in the world that are capable of doing these cutting-edge chips: TSMC, Samsung, and Intel. You have key technologies like the EUV technology from ASML, key research like IMEC in Belgium, and frankly, Europe has many of the core technologies. And as I like to say, between U.S., Europe, and Japan are the source of all of these core technologies. It's expensive, it's R&D, it's extraordinary innovation. And sometime, Klaus, I'm going to get you into a bunny suit in one of our fabs, because these fabs, they're almost $30 billion to build one of these complexes. These are the largest construction projects on Earth happening today to build the smallest things that have ever been built on Earth. This is extraordinary, right, and what's being done. And they're done then at scale. Over and over again, we're producing these extraordinary chips. Today, our most advanced chip is about 100 billion transistors, on a single package, and as we continue the progression of Moore's Law, and as I like to say, until the periodic table is exhausted, Moore's Law is alive and well. And we're going to hit 1 trillion transistors by the end of the decade, right, in a single package device. This is just extraordinary.
But if I understand directly, it's not so much the development which is costly, it's what you call the foundries. And can you explain why there are quite a number of manufacturers, but so few foundries? If I'm not mistaken, there are 5 foundries, or 5 to 6, I don't know.
Yeah, being able to, lots of people can design chips, and this idea of, fabless semiconductors, it's R&D centric, right? But it's not capital and manufacturing centric. There's very few people that manufacture, semiconductors, and only, as I said, 3 that can do leading edge. today. And, this is very expensive, very R&D intensive, extraordinarily intellectual property heavy. We have, 100,000 plus patents are associated with the leading edge semiconductor manufacturer.
100,000?
Yeah, associated with it. It's just, quite stunning, right, what's been built up over the 50-year history of the semiconductor industry. And every aspect of your life needs more of them going forward.
So if you build, for example, now a factory, I think in Magdeburg in Germany, is it a foundry or what, or for cutting edge, or is it just a normal chip factory?
No, this is cutting edge.
So it's cutting edge.
Yeah, and this will be, we expect when it comes online, our most advanced process technology, that we're just soon to bring into manufacturing is what we call 18A, sub 2 nanometers. This will be beyond that. So this will be on the order of 1.5 nanometer devices that we'll build in Magdeburg. So this will be not only the most advanced manufacturing in Germany, it'll be the most advanced manufacturing in the world will occur, in the Magdeburg site. We're quite excited about getting that underway.
And I know that Chancellor Scholz is very excited.
Indeed.
As a Deputy Chancellor Habeck, he referred to you and probably saw you even.
Indeed. But the most advanced manufacturing today in Europe, is what we do in Ireland at 4 nanometers. Outside of us, it's probably in the 10 to 15 nanometer range. This is a huge leap forward for all of Europe.
So if I understand you correctly, you may design chips and you may outsource the production to someone else.
To the foundry, right? And we're going to be we design chips and we're a foundry for chips as well going forward.
But the intellectual property is with you.
Right. For the foundry, but the intellectual property for the design is with the design company.
It's with, which you are both now design.
Right. Essentially, I'm rebuilding Intel. We're taking one broken company and we're creating 2 distinct companies inside of Intel. A manufacturing and a foundry company and a product and fabless company inside of one.
Yeah, thank you. Now, you referred to artificial intelligence and there's one chip factor, I don't want to mention the name, who is very much talked about because his or its chips are particularly related to AI.
Yes.
Could you explain, and are you also in this area, or what is special about AI?
Yeah, and this idea of high performance accelerated computing, right? And I give credit to my friend Jensen, right? That hey, they have pursued that domain pretty consistently for 20 years. High performance throughput computing, and then he got lucky with AI, really lucky. But he had steadfastly pursued that architectural pursuit of high performance computing, largely in graphics, for a period of time, and then AI happened. And remember, AI is an overnight 50-year success, right? The foundations of AI, were in the late 60s, right? And then for over 40 years, nothing happened. Right, when I was the architect of the 486, right, in the 80s, I was going to make it a great AI chip. What happened in the 80s in AI? Nothing, right? And then all of a sudden, the compute got big enough, the data got big enough, the algorithms got good enough, and we've seen this explosion of AI, right? And right now, we're seeing these very large systems for training, right? And we think about, GPT and OpenAI and so on. But the next several years of AI won't be around big model training, for hundreds of billions and trillions of parameters. The next several years of AI, in my estimation, is how do we use those models, right? How do we deploy them? How do we inference them? And how do we move them out of the big data centers into every device that we use? We've just launched what we call the AI PC. Right? How do we make, instead of having 100 billion parameters in the cloud, how can I put 10 billion parameters of your data on your PC that you're operating locally? And I call it the 3 laws of edge and AI. One is the laws of economics. If it's on your device locally, much more cost effective, 10, 100 times cheaper. Second is the laws of physics. If I have to round trip to the cloud, the speed of light is still the speed of light, right? Versus doing it locally. And the third is the laws of the land. right? The regulatory requirements. Am I going to take my real-time factory data to somebody else's cloud environment for local inferencing of my manufacturing line? Absolutely not. 80% of the data is still on-premise and privately held. So because of that, we see this idea of going from training, which still has exciting science in front of it, to much more inferencing, deployment, and edge applications. And that's why I'm quite excited, because there's going to be both. We're going to continue to see the science of AI evolve, but very much the deployment and utilization of it is where we believe the primary action will be for the next couple of years.
So the research comes mainly from inside the companies, not from university and from the scientific world today, because at the origin it was mainly the scientific world which drove the semiconductor development.
Yep.
And of course you are
big beneficiary.
in your first stage of career.
Yeah.
You were very much at one of those drivers.
Yeah.
But today, can you tell us how much the research is driven by industry and how much by the scientific world?
Yeah, and we've seen this shift of more and more of the research and development to industry over a sustained period of time. One piece of the CHIPS Act was, the establishment of NSTC in the U.S. We had hollowed out that leading edge research. And one of the things I believe, needs to, for, Western, democratic oriented countries, we must rebuild that long-term research.
Yeah.
Long-term research is 30 plus years. AI took over 40 years to hit maturity. The transistor took over 30 years to hit maturity. We must keep that long-term investment, and that's primarily, from governments, public sectors, DARPA-like things. We have lost that because businesses like mine, we're sort of like 15 years or less in the R&D, and we've seen that shift over time, and I think that's very unfortunate. And now, as we think about the science of AI, in particular, today, you remember Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow? All of our AI systems today are thinking fast.
Yeah.
We haven't brought reasoning into AI. It's a huge area of research, and most of the foundations of that, were seeds planted 20, 30 years ago about how we can prove correctness of systems. Today, our systems hallucinate. Tomorrow, if we're going to use them broadly, they have to be right. So how can they be fast and right? Just like, we've seen thinking fast and thinking slow. Huge areas of research in front of us. Huge areas, as I like to say, until the periodic table's exhausted, we're not done. Well, we have about 2/3 of the periodic table to go. Still lots of new science, new materials to be discovered, into the future. This is, what I think for a technologist, the next couple of decades, I just wish I was still in my 20s, right? The next couple of decades are going to be absolutely spectacular.
The exponential phase now.
Oh my gosh, it's going to be so good, Klaus. Right? How old are you? You and I need to find a way to get younger, because it's going to be a thrilling few decades.
We keep young, you see. But how does it come that, I come back to this 80-20, semiconductors are essential element for national defense and national security. Why did the US particularly, but also Europe, have it slipping out?
Yeah, I think people were somewhat asleep at the wheel from the policy perspective. There were, a few people, raising the concerns. But remember, we were in an era, where it was all about lowest cost supply chains. Hey, we don't care if we manufacture. We're going to create the intellectual property. We'll invent the algorithms. We'll write the software, right? We're sort of happy to bring other countries in the world into that manufacturing. That's hard. That's low end. We really don't want to work, right? We want to invent, right? And I think that was the overall general views, right, literally of the Western world for a couple of decades. Then all of a sudden we realized in critical industries, right, and I think the automotive industry is facing this right now, we could lose the entire automotive industry because we've lost the supply chain, right? And the semiconductor industry, literally, we were on the hair's edge of never being able to recover the manufacturing of this industry. I've said to some that, had I started the rebuilding of Intel a year later, I don't think I could have accomplished it, right? It was that much on the edge that we would have outsourced too many generations of technologies and never been able to rebuild it in the future. Because particularly for semiconductors, R&D and manufacturing are commingled, right? A factory without R&D in the semiconductor industry, essentially becomes a boat anchor within 6 months, right? It is that, because you're constantly doing research in the factory, in the manufacturing, process itself. R&D and manufacturing are inextricable in this industry.
What is the dependence of the industry on rare materials?
It's actually,
Is this a limiting factor? Or?
It's actually surprisingly not that terribly constrained, right, in that sense. We don't use that many materials. Remember, God's gift to mankind was silicon, right? Sand, the most prevalent material on Earth, right, is our core material. So he gave us lots of it, right, and the refining of it's in, Japan and Asia, right, and Europe. So the core materials are actually not that severely limited. Other portions of the supply chain, but silicon itself isn't that bad. But we are taking steps to make sure we have built resilience and sustainability. The environmental aspects of the chemicals that we use is a super important, factor to us. Intel is decades ahead of anybody else in terms of the sustainability. We've committed to, by 2030, full, 100% renewable in our factories and our Type 1 and Type 2, full sustainability of our water use, 2040 net zero. So it's a huge and important topic, for us over time. And any place we find, critical material limitations is how do we go, expand that? Because remember, most of the critical minerals issues are not minerals issues, they're refining issues, right? Where the minerals, they're usually fairly available. It's where they refined are the key points of constraint.
But could energy be a limiting factor? Because some people are concerned about the high consumption of electricity.
Yeah, and today, when you think about the IT industry as a whole, different studies, but probably somewhere in the 3 to 5% range of energy consumption, goes for IT infrastructure today. Different studies would indicate, and particularly with the surge of AI, that could triple or quadruple, right, over the next decade. So that could become quite constraining, to build these big, massive data centers, which, by the way, puts pressure on us. How do we keep reducing the power requirements of our chips, as well as, things like water cooling, right, so that we can increase the efficiency of them as well. Another area of significant research.
I come back to China. When do you think China will have caught up with the frontiers of chip technologies?
Yeah, the export policies that have been put in place, and recently we've seen the Dutch, in particular, in place, the U.S. policies, Japanese policies, et cetera. It sort of puts a floor in the 10 to 7 nanometer range. Right, for it, and we, are racing to go below 2 nanometers, and then 1.5, and we see no end to that in sight. And I see the policies in place, and it's not like China's not going to keep innovating, but this is a highly interconnected industry. The staging of Trump, right, the mirrors of Zeiss, the equipment assembly of ASML, the chemicals and resist in Japan, the mass making of Intel. All of those together, I think this is a 10-year gap, and I think it's a sustainable 10-year gap with the export policies that have been put in place today. And I do believe that portends well for the policies that have been established in the world, right, for export and competitiveness, right, in this environment. And, we're leaning hard into making sure that's the case.
Now, there are so many investments going on, like in Magdeburg and so on. I think there are plans in France, there are plans in Ireland, additional ones. Aren't you afraid about, because every country wants to have now its own asset, aren't you afraid about overcapacity?
Well, if you go back to the beginning of the discussion, right, you have this, hey, we're making 5 and 8 year investments, and we have cyclicality quarters. I mean, you can't even tell me what the demand is next quarter, much less, 5 years from now. That said, I think fundamentally compute and AI in particular are going to be like the gas law. they will expand to consume every amount of compute capacity that is economically available. So I believe that becomes such a driver of demand that I think advanced logic capabilities, I have no concern in this at all. Now, of course, when I explain to my board my crazy capital request, I of course have to say that, not only say that, but say it with conviction.
Now, we have, I think, 5 minutes to go. Let me see whether there's any question here in the room. There must be, yeah, please. Yeah.
John Chipman, Executive Chairman of the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Two basic about spirit. The first is that I am told that once you get to 1 nanometer chip, the electrons start colliding with each other. It's very difficult below that. So there is perhaps a limit. Is that true? And the second question I have is, I am equally told that when Morris Chang establishes a foundry in Arizona or elsewhere, he does not have the confidence that that foundry can reach the same level of expertise as his own in Taiwan for reasons of human capital. So can you explain, when you're producing something 80,000 times bigger than a human hair, why is the human skill so important?
Yeah. So, on the first topic, the way I like to describe it is Moore's law is like driving down the road on a foggy night, right? You maybe see 100 meters in front of you. When you've gone 20 or 30 meters down the road, you see about 100 meters in front of you. And Moore's law, we see about a decade in front of us, right? And I've been in the industry now for 42 years, right? Almost embarrassing to say it's been that long. But, with it, right, I've heard about the death of Moore's law, for about 3 decades. Right? And I sit here today telling you I know how to build a 1 trillion transistor chip by the end of the decade. Moore's law is alive and well, and we're going to keep making it true because it's not a law of physics, right? As you suggest, when you get to 1 nanometer, it's a law of innovation, of commitment, of economic pouring into the criticality of this technology. And we as a company, Intel, are going to keep making it true. Second, TSMC is an extraordinary company. They have refined a manufacturing capability and a customer orientation that is really unmatched in the industry. However, they do R&D and manufacturing in one place, Taiwan. Right? Intel has operated with a distributed manufacturing footprint for over 4 decades. We know how to operate in different segments of the world. We know how to do this. We're about, I see my best friend, Senator Portman here from Ohio. We're about to start the Silicon Heartland in the center of the United States, bringing manufacturing back to the heartland of America. With it, we know how to operate distributed manufacturing. They don't yet, right? And this idea of tethering of R&D and manufacturing, right? He's right. They only have one place of R&D. I have a distributed R&D model. I have a center of R&D in Oregon and Arizona that are extraordinary in the world. We're absolutely convinced we know how to do this. Let the race continue. They're a great company, but we're committed to being back to unquestioned technology leadership in the world. And I think by 2025, we will have proven that to the world with manufacturing of sub-2 nanometer chips that are simply the best in the world, based on Western technology. And we're pretty proud to be in that race.
How many people do you have in research and development?
We're on the order of 50,000 engineers total, right? In the TD space, in the core technology space, in the order of 20,000. So this is,
impressive.
Yeah. This is at scale R&D, right?
We have time for one last question. Anybody?
Right. Senator Portman there.
Rob?
Difference that CHIPS Act makes, and as a co-sponsor of that bill, and having heard from a lot of my Republican colleagues about industrial policy and how that's not our direction, some of them thought we were overreaching and doing too much. The reality is there will still be considerable dependency, even when you combine the EU and the U.S. And you touched on that a little bit, but if you could talk a little more about that. I think going about 37% of chips 30 years ago to about 12% today, and even after $52 billion and about $39 billion on the manufacturing side, my understanding is we'll only be at what number in terms of the percentage of semiconductors?
We'll be crawling our way back into the 30s, right? With chips 1. I do believe there'll need to be a chips 2, at some point to continue building those policy decisions. And remember, these were bad policy decisions in the U.S. and tax policy, right, and capital investment policy, long-term R&D investments. All of those aggregately caused us to go from 80 to 20, right? To rebuild that, we're not going to do that in one act, as good as it was, thank you, Senator, right, in a few years. This will take decades to rebuild this industry, but I really believe that CHIPS 1, CHIPS 2, fundamental industrial policy, improvements in R&D, improvements in manufacturing, capital policies, rethinking of some of the financial requirements, long-term, human capital development. I firmly believe that we can rebuild this industry, and it's the right thing for our economies, it's the right thing for our industries, and it's the right thing for our national security. And we're deeply committed to help drive that. Simply put, it's the right thing for the heritage of Intel, it's the right thing for the technology industry, and it is the right thing for the world. We're going to make it happen.
Thank you, Pat. We have come to an end of this discussion, and I think what we have seen is a leader with something which we so much need today when we talk about leadership. It's conceptual thinking. And you are in one of the most complex areas, high tech, at the edge. And I think we all leave this with a better knowledge about the industry and be impressed by your leadership. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.